All right, the court will note that the witness, Detective Duncan, has been placed under oath. I am going to inquire as to whether or not you have viewed any of these trial proceedings because it is being live streamed. Have you listened in on any of the testimony that's been provided in trial since the case started?
I have not.
All right, thank you for that affirmation. With that, Ms. Blake, you can go ahead and inquire on direct if you'd like.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you please spell your name for the record?
Good morning. My name is Nathan Duncan. It's Nathan. Last is Duncan, Duncan.
Where are you currently employed?
I'm currently employed with the Chandler Police Department in Chandler, Arizona.
What is your current title and/or position?
I'm currently assigned to the robbery homicide unit as a detective.
How long have you been with that unit?
Robbery homicide unit, I've been there for 10 years.
Have you held other positions within the Chandler Police Department?
I have. I was hired with Chandler Police Department in year 2000, June of 2000, went to the academy, graduated in September. After graduating from the academy, I was a patrol officer for roughly 3 years. And after that, I went to the property crimes unit as a detective for approximately 11 years.
Do you have any specialized training in order to be a law enforcement officer?
So our training, like I stated, in June of 2000, we attend the Arizona Law Enforcement Academy as a program. I believe it was 16 weeks. And then afterwards, we attend a field training program with our own department. After that, every year, for the last almost 24 years, we go through advanced officer training, and we also do additional training in our specific area of expertise, if you would.
And were you working with the Chandler Police Department on July 11th of 2019?
I was.
Do you recall if you were on shift?
I was, yes.
And do you recall responding out to a report of a shooting?
Yes.
Do you recall where that was?
The report of the shooting on July 11th, 2019 happened at about 8:36 a.m. at the address of 5531 South Four Peaks Place in Chandler.
And you said the call came in about 8:36 a.m.?
Correct.
Were you one of the first responding law enforcement?
I was not.
Do you recall approximately when you responded out?
I would have arrived probably 20, 30 minutes after that original call.
When a call comes in of a shooting, who goes out first? Is it a patrol officer or a detective? Can you talk a little bit about that process?
So the immediate response to a call for service, in this case, a 911 call, a patrol officer will respond, or multiple patrol officers will respond for that call of service. They will get there, triage the situation, assist in any way they can, and then determine what they have. If additional resources are needed or investigative resources are needed from detectives, then detectives will be called in.
And in this case, did you learn who made that 911 call?
I did.
And who was that?
Alex Cox.
Did you learn what was reported?
Yes, Alex had contacted 911 and reported that he had shot his brother-in-law, Charles Vallow, in self-defense.
Prior to that, had you ever heard the name Charles Vallow?
I had not.
Had you ever heard the name Alex Cox?
I had not.
When you arrived on scene, were you given specific assignments?
Yes, in homicide investigations, we were given assignments. The case agent in this case was Detective Nathan Moffat, and he will assign tasks, if you would. In this particular case, I was assigned, along with Detective Coons, to document the crime scene.
And I think you've said, and that's common in a homicide investigation.
Yes, there are many multiple parts to go into a homicide investigation: interviews, scene processing. So we have a team of 6 at our particular unit, so we will divide up tasks.
At some point, did your role within the investigation change?
It did.
And can you talk a little bit about that?
So with the promotion of Detective Moffat in June of 2020, I was assigned to be the case agent in the death of Charles Vallow in June of 2020. However, I had done work prior to this date on this case.
And backing up to that July 11th, you're one of the scene detectives.
Yes.
Can you walk us through what you observed when you got there?
So, as our job as a scene detective, we are there to document the scene, and we are assisted by crime scene technicians in this effort. So, our first uh, move that we will make is we'll have the patrol officers who are present, who can provide some of the information to us as to what took place, give us a briefing. From that point, one of our crime scene technicians will enter and take overall photographs. And during this time, we will make observations of our own. Um, the crime scene in this case was very simple relative to other crime scenes. The residence on Four Peaks Place, single family residence, you enter the residence through a front door on the west of the residence. As you enter, you come into a small foyer, and then it opens up into a large living room. This one was unique in which there was a wood plank floor. There was no furniture in this living room. It was there was mirrors along the north side, an open window along the east side, mirrors on the wall on the south side, and mirrors on the wall on the west side. So as indicated, it was very sparse. There was no furniture at all. Inside when making my observations, I noticed the body of a Caucasian male, later identified to be Charles Vallow, laying on the west side of this room. North of where he was laying, there was an aluminum baseball bat. And then a little bit north of this was a baseball cap that we had found out was worn by Charles earlier. To the west of Charles' body, there were two 45 caliber casings that were recovered. Also noted during this time was a bullet strike and a lodged bullet, or what we refer to as a projectile, that had lodged into the baseboard along the east side of that particular room.
And as you walk in, that's your initial scene observation.
Yes,
As part of the scene detective or just as part of the investigation, did you make observations regarding the body of Charles Vallow?
I did.
And I guess to back up a little bit, are you aware as to Charles' condition when first responding officers arrived?
When first responding officers arrived, he was pronounced dead by the Chandler Fire Department.
So upon your arrival, he'd already been pronounced dead.
That is correct.
Do you know if prior to your arrival there were any life-saving measures taken?
There were reports in the that Alex Cox had done CPR, and there was also indications, evidence left behind that the fire department had placed EKG or AED pads on Charles to determine whether life-saving efforts were needed.
And you said it was reported that Alex had done CPR. Did you observe any signs that would support CPR having been performed?
So in looking at Charles' body and the position that it was found, his head was to the north and his feet were to the south and his arms were to his side. I did see one wound consistent with a bullet wound in the front lower left quadrant of his torso. And that's the only wound that I noticed at the time. His shirt was cut open. He had a black t-shirt on. It was cut open by fire department. And as indicated, AED pads and EKG leads were put on for medical intervention. I did notice a lot of blood that was present on the floor or surrounding his body. Did not notice a lot of blood, which in my opinion, having given CPR and having been shot multiple times, I believe there should have been more blood.
And in relation to the CPR, had it been performed, you would have expected to see more blood?
I would have expected that, yes.
So based on your experience, you didn't see signs of CPR having been performed?
Correct.
And additional observations of Charles' body, were you able to see how many wounds he had initially?
So as indicated initially, it was just the one that I noticed with the front of his body, the lower left quadrant of his torso.
And at some point, did you notice any additional injuries to Charles' body?
I did.
And can you tell us what those were?
So in this case, in all homicide or death investigation cases, when the medical examiner is coming out to assist in these cases, the body is considered evidence, and we do not touch the body until the medical examiner arrives. They have jurisdiction over the body. So my initial observations were that one wound consistent with a bullet wound to the front lower left quadrant. After the medical examiner arrives, they take their own series of photographs, and we provide them with information that we know at the time. At that point, the medical examiner will then begin to examine or manipulate the body as they choose. During this time, the AED pad that was placed in the center of Charles's chest was removed, and an additional wound consistent with a bullet wound was noticed in the center of his chest. Additionally, when Charles' body was rolled, there were 2 additional wounds on his back consistent with bullet holes.
And when you talk about the 2 injuries to the front and the 2 to the back, did they appear to be, one being an entry wound, one being an exit wound, did they appear to be linked?
We try not to make that determination at the time. A lot of that goes in as far as entry, exits, and we also do the totality of the circumstances. In this case, Alex had mentioned that he had shot twice, so we would assume that they would be entrance wounds and exit wounds.
And so you talked about, Alex said he'd shot Charles twice, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware of what else Alex had claimed in relation to the shooting?
As indicated, he claimed that he had shot him in self-defense. He had indicated that he had the baseball bat, and Charles had struck Alex in the back of the head with the baseball bat and refused to drop the bat, and that's when he shot him.
And based on your observations, were you able to form any opinion in your training and experience as to where they would have been where Charles would have been in relation to the shooting?
Yes. So Alex had informed us that he was standing in the southwest corner of this particular living room, as described, and he was facing in a northeast direction, and he and Charles were face to face with each other. He indicated that he shot him twice standing up, and he shot him twice in the chest from a standing position.
And are you aware, if you talked about the medical examiner's office showing up to take Charles' body?
Yes.
Do you know if an autopsy was ultimately conducted?
It was.
And are you aware if there was any determination made as to whether or not Charles would have been standing when both shots were fired?
So the 2 wounds, according to the medical examiner, the wound described in the center of the chest was front to back, exited his back, and it was slightly at a downward angle. The second wound that I'd mentioned, the lower left quadrant, that bullet traveled upward at a very steep angle, exiting the back of Charles's shoulder. When examining and observing the original scene, we had brought Alex back to do what's called a walkthrough to have him explain exactly where he was when all this took place. He indicated, like I stated, that he was standing and fired 2 shots standing, and while Charles was in front of him. Prior to Alex coming, we made the decision to cleaning up the blood that was left. And when we did clean up that blood, noticed a indention in the planked wood flooring that was near Charles's left shoulder, and that would be consistent with the exit wound on that back left. Also near Charles's left shoulder was a bullet or a projectile that was present when first responders arrived. So based on the autopsy reports and the scene evidence, the first shot fired on Charles would have been the center of his chest, exiting the back and then lodging in the baseboard. The second shot fired at Charles would have been while he was laying down on the ground.
And you talked about this room either not having furniture, being very sparsely furnished. Based on your investigation, were you able to determine whether or not a struggle had occurred?
Obviously, one thing we look at, we're trying to determine and prove or disprove the self-defense claim. And with the room being sparsely furnished, we were unable to see if anything was knocked over, broken, anything like that. Charles did have some wounds or some abrasions to his knees. He was wearing shorts at the time, so he had some abrasions to his knees and also some scrapes on his hands or arms, some minor scrapes there. So those two things would indicate that a struggle took place, but other than that, there was nothing that would indicate that.
And you talked about, we've talked a little bit about the blood in relation to at least the CPR. Was there any additional blood located in the residence?
There was.
And can you talk a little bit about that?
So Alex had indicated that he had washed his hands in the sink at the residence. The only other location that blood was present, besides underneath Charles's body, was on the faucet in the kitchen sink.
And was this, based on the report of the shooting, was this investigated as a homicide?
Yes, it was.
And we talked a little bit about you ended up taking over the case or being assigned the case agent or the lead on this in June of 2020.
Correct.
You initially responded out on this July 11th date of 2019. Did you continue to work on the case after July 11th, 2019?
Unfortunately, right after this homicide, I had another homicide, so I did not work on it for a period of time. I then picked up this case and assisted Detective Moffat roughly January of 2020 with looking at phone extractions and iCloud information.
And when you picked up again in January, you talked about you started looking at phone extractions.
Correct.
As part of that, did you end up seeking some search warrants?
I did.
And was one of the devices that you reviewed the content of Charles Vallow's phone?
Yes, it was.
And do you recall how you came to be in possession of Charles Vallow's phone?
Yes. Through our investigation, we had determined that Charles's phone was pretty much the catalyst of an argument that occurred between Lori and Charles on this day. After the shooting, or shortly after the shooting, Lori had left the house, taking Charles's phone with her. She would later return that phone to detectives, and that phone was now in our possession, and an extraction was done on that actual device.
And did you, in fact, review the extraction?
I did.
And in reviewing the extraction, was there a significant amount of information contained on that device?
Yes, there is.
And as you went through it, did you look at things that seemed to have significance to you in relation to the investigation?
Yes,
And in preparation of your testimony today, did you prepare an exhibit related to that content?
I did.
Do you believe that it would aid in your testimony today?
Absolutely.
Do you believe it would aid the jurors in understanding the evidence and information?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to ask that the witness be shown what's been marked as State's Exhibit 49. I do have a copy for counsel and a courtesy copy for the court as well. Again, as with some of the last exhibits from the state, these are printouts of a PowerPoint. The PowerPoint itself is on a jump drive.
Counsel, these are 3 different exhibits, right? 4. Looks like they're all the same.
I believe there are some other exhibits. That should all be one exhibit. Or,
And is it your position I get one of these?
yes, there would be a copy for you.
Thank you. Thank you, officer.
And Detective, I would ask you to just look through those if you could.
Okay. Okay.
Do those appear to be an accurate depiction of the PowerPoint that you prepared?
They do.
And again, they are taken from an extraction from Charles Vallow's cell phone. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Did that include looking at an iCloud account?
It does include an iCloud account. Yes.
And does it include messages or other content from that phone as well?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, I would move for the admission of State's Exhibit 49.
No objection, Judge.
All right, Exhibit 49 will be admitted. And again, this will be actually the PowerPoint on a digital format. And the court has reviewed a printed copy of that. Ms. Blake, with that being introduced, if you'd like, I think this would be a good time to stop for the morning recess before we start with the publishing of this, if that's where you're headed.